All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's 7:03. So we're just going to go ahead and get started so we're not taking up too much of your time tonight. My name is Brianna, and I am the membership coordinator for for Common Sense Childbirth National Perinatal Task Force. I am located in Ocala, Florida. I've been a birth worker for the past 4 years. We do these knowledge share calls as a peer-to-peer educational knowledge series within the task force. Everyone that is has either organized or included in this call is a part of the task force. They are amazing women doing amazing things within their community, and I'm so excited to hear all of this great knowledge that they're going to share with us this evening. Um, and yeah, I'm going to pass it over to Leslie.
Almost forgot to unmute. Welcome, welcome everyone to this National Perinatal Task Force Knowledge Share call about family policing and birth justice. And we are with birth justice champions Toshira Maldonado and Porsche Holland-Otunba. And our reproductive justice legal expert is Catherine Guichardo. This call is organized by me, Leslie Farrington, founder of the Black Coalition for Safe Motherhood, and we are an Igniter member of the National Perinatal Task Force. We promote the use of the ACT Healthcare Advocacy Toolkit in Black communities nationwide. I invite you to see our website or join one of our fourth Wednesday ACT workshops. To learn more about ACT, I will only say for now that ACT stands for the self-affirming and potentially life-saving steps to take charge of your care. Ask questions until you understand the answers. Claim your space, both physical and mental. There are 2 T's, trust your body and tell your story. We'll do the next slide. The next 50 minutes will be about how we can address family policing in the birth justice sphere with grassroots activism, legal advocacy, and holistic community support of birthing families, especially Black birthing people. Next slide. First, I'm going to give some introductions, and then I will briefly show resources for your reference, and you will have access to the slides. We're going to put the link to the slides in the chat. First, Toshira. Toshira Maldonado is a Black maternal health advocate with 25 years of experience as a community birth worker, womb healer, doula mentor, trainer, and family justice grassroots organizer. Toshira serves as executive director of Most Beautiful Womb Incorporated. WOMB stands for Women Overcoming Major Barriers. Porsche Holland-Otunba is a Black maternal health advocate, a birth worker, mentor, and trainer. She's a certified lactation counselor, childbirth educator, and founder and CEO of Reclaim Black Motherhood. Porsche is also senior instructor of the ACT Facilitator training for the Black Coalition for Safe Motherhood. Next slide. After Toshira and Porsche's discussion, we will hear from Catherine Guichardo. Catherine is with If, When, How, Lawyers for Reproductive Justice. Catherine helps people who call their repro legal helpline to understand the laws around various reproductive experiences and get free confidential legal services. Prior to joining If, When, How, Catherine was a family defense attorney helping reunite parents with their children. And you can see all of what If, When, How offers here on this slide. Next slide. So we're showing the resources now that you can use in serving your communities and families. Working in New York State, we have JMAC for Families, founded by Joyce McMillan, a fierce advocate fighting for the abolition of family policing. JMAC stands for Just Making a Change for Families. It's a nonprofit working to dismantle family policing system while simultaneously investing in community support that keeps families together. Next slide. Then we have the Maryland Office of the Public Defender's Program, Better Together Early Family Advocacy. And it's a project in Baltimore City that aims to prevent family separation. Next slide. An important source of information and guidance is the National Coalition for Child Protection Reform, that's working to help children by changing public policy concerning foster care and family preservation. Next slide. We have the Birthrights Bar Association and Pregnancy Justice, more legal resources with a wealth of information. Next slide. And there's Children's Rights, working to hold government systems accountable for protecting kids and keeping families together. And I like that they expose dysfunction and deep roots of racism inside child welfare. And we're going to hear about more of this from Porsche and Toshira in a moment. Next slide. There's the Elephant Circle, which is fighting civil rights lawsuits around the perinatal period. So it's another option. And next slide. You will have access to this sampling of resources. We have 2 slides with lists of resources, and the links are here. We hope that you will find the resources that are specific to your city and state, and you can learn how to be part of a network that keeps families together. Now I will pass the mic along to Toshira and Portia.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Good day, everyone. I hope you all are well today. As folks are coming into the room, welcome, welcome. Feel free to keep dropping in the chat where you're checking in from, and feel free to make connections in the chat as we dive into this hefty but very real topic. So as I moderate this discussion, I really want to open up and hear from you, Toshira, just a little bit about what the issue is that you found and saw, right? And what kind of yanked you into this, like to being able to speak to it, to advocate, to really say, listen, like, get out of our families, get out of our business. And as your post on IG said, as we see you walking down the street, like, this is a reproductive justice issue, like, back up. So would love to hear a little bit about just your journey and motivation, just illuminating this issue for us.
Thank you, Portia. It's a pleasure to be here in this space to talk about a matter that is very dear to my heart when there's triumph. But the residue of the pain as a 9-year-old child will never escape me. And what brought me into this space was my lived experience. I think back on my years in the family regulation system. I came in about 8 years ago, charged, ready to work, feeling that I could make a change. I felt that as a person that understood the importance of keeping families together and giving Black mamas with challenges, especially substance use and opiate use disorders, a chance. It was almost like my chance to make right what was wrong in my life with my mother. I feel like some families are torn apart and we focus on that mother who loses their child, but we don't pay attention to that child who lost their mother. And so at 9 years old, I lost my mother because my mother was separated. My mother and I were separated. I was fortunate enough to go into kinship care. And I lost my mother again at 17, months after I became a mother for the first time. So while I was in a cold, dark room laboring, my mother was in a cold, dark room, probably feeling me in spirit. My mother, I remember talking to her the day after my son was born, and her social worker allowed her to have a 5-minute phone call with me. She was calling me from the Etna Man Correctional Facility 27 years ago. And all she could say was, "I'm sorry, Nina, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." And it was so much going through my head. And I realized that it was in that moment I felt that my family was a target. I felt that at some point in my life, I would put the pieces back together. And at that time, 17-year-old me, traumatized and separated from my mother, I did not know what 27 years later would look like. But I will say that what brought me here was my lived experience. And what keeps me here is the drive to see Black families and Latinx families thrive, that we rise above these systemic structures that are rooted in deep, dark spaces of racism and disenfranchisement and marginalization, where we also know that there's a dollar attached to Black lives. We are profitable alive, we're profitable dead, we're profitable sick, we're most profitable when we're broken. Look at the prison system. And so I think it's important that as a birth worker with 25 years of experience, 19 years old, started out working as a temporary employee at the local methadone clinic. I was pregnant myself at 19 years old. And the very same methadone clinic that my mother would get her treatment from 10 years before, I was working there. And so I was immediately drawn to the mothers that I saw with babies and pregnant bellies. And I can remember nurses telling me, don't be giving them candy, and, they ask you for $1, don't give it to them because, you got to keep your boundaries, you're young. But I'm from a small town. We knew everybody. It's not hard to make connection. And so it was at that moment I realized that while I was emerging and growing a family, I was newly married, I was pregnant with my second child. I just had a heart and a drive to one day do something impactful. And it started in my church alongside with the founder of Most Beautiful Womb, which we were Sisters of the Covenant then. It started then. It started with feeding people. The most humanistic, basic thing you could do for a person is feed them. But these people were from the local shelter who oftentimes were engaged with the family regulation system. And so when I would go to the hospitals to support these moms, I immediately saw DIFUS come in. It's DCP&P now. But there was no mental health treatment. There was no reconstruction plan or reunification plan. It was an automatic C-section because you have HIV. We know now that you don't have to have a C-section with HIV because you're an IV drug user and you might have HIV. Even if you're negative, you're automatically getting a C-section, and you never got an opportunity to bond with your baby. DIFUS was coming. They did not do a proper family finding, and the trauma that I saw vicariously as back then, in my early 20s, it was surmounting, and it continued to bring up my own pain, but I never let go. And so in all that I've said, I feel that as a Black maternal health advocate, as an activist, depending on if we're on the inside or the outside, I think it's important that we have these conversations and they go across multiple disciplines wherever we're people facing and we're touching Black lives, because the family regulation system has morphed into a human trafficking ring, and it's legal. And we can't be afraid to name our oppressors. And we also have to be very intentional and strategic with fighting achievable battles. And so I feel that this conversation tonight will ground us and give us some information as well as some strategy on how this intersects with birth justice and reproductive justice. And now in the advent of the Black doulas exploding, and we're out here doing amazing stuff, amazing things in our community, it's important that this is a fight that we join in, because if they keep killing our mamas and then if they take our babies away and we're constantly ducking the bullets of oppression, then what's of our future?
Wow, that is so good. I thank you for your transparency. I thank you for that transparency. Listen, some of us may be able to agree. You could put a thumbs up. You could say yes, amen, whatever resonates with you around shared live experience and why you do the work you do, right? And that is something that is to be acknowledged, that I have been there. I am in the place. I feel you. But then you also made yourself an expert in this work, sat in seats, held hands with people, held space for people, and can now say, not only have I been there and been a product of this and have been able to do such amazing work, but I feel you and now I can advocate. I can knock down some doors. I can throw some chairs. Like, we're going to make some stuff work. And so I love that and wanted to acknowledge that as we dive into some practical ways to think about this. And just you all feel free to begin to drop thoughts, reactions, and questions. There is a dedicated time to be able to discuss some of these things. So just so your brain doesn't forget, because sometimes age will do that, especially if you're over the 30 hump. Go ahead and put your question, your thought in the chat now, so we don't forget that, and we'll circle back for sure. And so thinking about birth workers and doulas, we have speak people in the space and understand the work and the impact, the importance of the Black doula. And you made mention to this. How specifically would you recommend that we could be resources, we, as I am one as well, to families who are now involved in the family regulation system? What are some ways practically when it's like, I can't curse this person out, I can't necessarily fight them, but I see what's going on. What do I do as maybe even little old me, doula, birth worker? Like, do I have a role? What can I do for my families?
Well, we absolutely have roles, and we have major roles, because depending on the level of relationship you build with these families, that's primary. We're not going in as, the birth coach or the companion in the birthing space. It's just the fiber of our communities that we're communal. And, no other culture can you go up and say, hey, sis, and they say, hey, sis, what's up? It's just something with us, just as expansive as we all know what it means to dream about fish. There are just some things we know, and there are just some things that are a part of us. And it's important that we operate and walk in this space with the integrity, the family integrity, the glue, be that glue. And as Mama Joyce McMillan talks about mandated supporting, be that mandated supporter, but you can't be that mandated supporter if you don't have a relationship. So it's first building a relationship, because oftentimes you won't know that that family is involved in the family regulation or family policing system, also known as CPS, Child Welfare, Child Protective Services. And I just want to make the disclaimer that it's important that we assign the right language to it, because, child welfare is not child welfare. And family regulation, some families do need to be regulated. We're not saying that families are perfect, and I just want to separate that. But I think it's important that we're building relationships, that we are the first line of communication and education, and that we're also helping these moms and these birthing people to see that they are the experts as well. And so depending on how they show up to their OBGYN or their midwife office or whatever other partner in the community that they're dependent or reliant upon, it's important that they're showing up in a way that gets them respect. And we already know we have poor outcomes. A Black woman with a master's degree making six figures has a worse outcome than a white woman with no high school diploma. We know we know the scale isn't tipped in our favor, but it's important that moms are educated, that if in fact they are involved with the family regulation system because of a reason connected to probably intimate partner violence, substance use, being unhoused, our families are criminalized for being poor. And so it's important that we build that relationship so that they will trust you enough to tell you the truth. Because oftentimes you're walking in and you're at the birth and you're there and you've got the diffuser with the lavender and you massaging them and, oh, it's a wonderful birth. And then the nurses come in and say, you tested positive and, we're going to have to call DHS or, DCP&P. And like, wait a minute, you're standing there. I didn't put all this work in with this family. I thought we had a connection. You never told me what was going on, girl. I've had those conversations. But what it taught me to do over the years was to build my intake packet, which it was inclusive of a birth plan, and you give it to them. You got 2 copies, one for you, one for them. Yours, I'm gonna let you fill it out when you get ready. You share what you want me to know, and that's not gonna stop me from asking questions, because as we meet, as we build relationship, I'm gonna remember what you say to me and I'm gonna write it down. And when we get to a point where you trust me and you don't see me as another leg of the system, or you don't see me as a money grabber, or you see me as your sister in solidarity, and you see me as a person that will help you physically with the help that you need and tell you what you need to hear. To me, that's about being that mandated supporter so that we can mitigate and we can offset those traumas that come as a result of being engaged with the system. So I know I said a lot, but there's so many levels to it. And it starts with building a relationship. It starts with understanding that you are serving them, that they don't have to tell you anything. Now, it's things that we might know off the cuff because, we just know what we know. But then how do we create a space of non-judgment, and how do we check our biases? And then how do we let them know, at what point do we say, okay, now we have to have a talk because here's what I'm seeing, and it's holding them accountable to know that they have to understand how this is going to land. And the way that I may see it is going to be totally different than the way the nurse in the hospital sees it. And when we look at the power dynamic in our hospitals, look at the disproportionate number of Black and brown L&D professionals, from nurses, midwives on down to the Black. And there is a safety when we see those who look like us. And so if we don't see that in the hospital and we do see it in the community, then I feel that Black doulas and birth workers, we have to take these mamas by the hand, pull them by the wrist, help them, clean them up if we need to, love on them, bring them to a place of emotional safety, and then we work our way forward. And I think that is a big part of our job.
Thank you for that. That is so good. And I just want to encourage birth workers, take a deep breath. It's a lot. It's a lot that we face, that we see, but there is something powerful about um really having a solid relationship, particularly because for the most part in the doula relationship or the childbirth educator relationship or the lactation professional relationship, there's been a sense of opting in, right? You weren't like forced upon me, I have to go to this program, I gotta sit in this thing, y'all making somebody come to my house. And so if this person is saying, I'm open to you, I want to share, I want to be transparent, you up in their house, you seeing how things are going, how they're relating to their family, it's a great opportunity to be real transparent and to say, hey, I want to be there for you, I want to protect and support you as much as possible, but babe, like, friend, let me know what's going on.
Don't have me
Please
looking
don't set
stupid.
me up for the okie doke, okay?
Right. And a lot of times, we're going hard for our families. We're showing up at doctor's appointments. And then, I can speak from my personal experience. I've gotten pushback from, doctors or midwives that did not look like me. And it was almost like they know what's on that toxicology or that blood test. They know. I don't know, because that doesn't necessarily mean that my client is going to tell me what's going on just because I'm there. So it's like, well, do I scale back on my advocacy? Do I scale back? No. At this point, it's my job to empower you to speak up. You know what's going on in your life. Okay, you know much better than me. So I feel like a big part of our job in the accountability part and the accountability part of it is holding them accountable to themselves first. Harm reduction is a good practice. It's a good measure. But they don't need us telling them, you shouldn't be getting high. You shouldn't be doing this. Oh, you should get out of that relationship. You know what can happen. They don't need to hear that because they know that already. I think what they need to hear is the practical side. Okay, let's work through a plan that if in fact the baby has to go into kinship care, because now, the laws have changed where they're less likely to just immediately put the baby in placement. I'm going to say for Philadelphia with DHS and KUA, there's an aggressive approach to find family members. Okay, so if you have a a family that you're working with, and you already know that there are some challenges because you've built that relationship, you've got that rapport, they're scared. Okay, let's work through the fear. Because if we're proactive, if you're going to your programs, let's start doing things before the judge puts it on a DRO. Let's start being practical in our approach of, okay, mom, well, here's a program that you can utilize, or let's make a couple of phone calls together. That's the relationship building. I was formerly trained as a doula through Common Sense Childbirth Institute, and Mama Jenny talks about the JJ way, access, connection, knowledge, and empowerment. And so with every family that I know is possibly going to be integrated or involved in the family regulation system, I think of access. What can I give them access to? What information, what knowledge, what supports? So kind of like set them up so that if and when they have to possibly face a judge at that 72-hour adjudicatory hearing, then they already are able to say, Your Honor, I know what I've done. I realize that this is what my circumstances are, and I've already begun to do this. And here's the proof that I've already enrolled in treatment. And, I realize that the baby is in place. It's kind of like taking accountability, and it's not dummying down. It's really muscling up. And I feel like it takes a lot of courage for these moms to really look themselves in the mirror after carrying a baby 9 months with an addiction or in an intimate partner violence situation. It's easy for us who have healthy partners and spouses to say, oh, I wouldn't take that. Ain't nobody going to hit me. But that's not their life. And you're not in their life. And you don't know what's attached to the abuse that they may be receiving. You just have no way of knowing. But what we do know is love is the fabric that gets washed many times and never fades. And you have to have love and compassion with this work. If you do not have love for this work, if you are not willing to get in the trenches with this work, and if you're not expecting this, because that's another thing, we don't expect to have to deal with these, dark situations. We want to be the wonderful doula, that has the lavender in the diffuser. We don't want to deal with all of these issues because it's too much. But being a community doula, this is what you need to be prepared to do. Now, being a mainstream doula, you don't have to deal with that because they've paid you $3,000 to $5,000, and you're going to do whatever they tell you to do, and you're going to be their glorified housekeeper for as long as they hire you. But being a community doula, it's totally different. And I feel like we don't talk enough about the real deal of being a community doula. So, think about it. We're fighting for equal pay with Medicaid. We're for a livable wage with Medicaid. Why are we fighting to be paid by Medicaid a livable wage for the work that we do? Well, wealthy people don't have to deal with Medicaid. So what happens when you are impoverished? Family regulation is often a poverty issue or a mental health issue or an addiction issue. So I feel that we really need to change the narrative around community birth work, and we need to put some respect on the work that we do, but we also need to put in perspective that we're not dealing with perfect people. Expect to deal with imperfect families and be prepared to guide them and be prepared to hold them and don't let them go. I can't tell you how many times, I've had doulas that tell me, oh no, I don't deal with them kind of births, and I don't deal with this. Why are you in this work? Because you're actually creating more harm. And you possibly are the one that will call CPS. We've seen it all. I mean, Portia, you already know. But I feel like for those that are committed, I think it's important that we stay the course, that we find our tribe, that we find that if it's that doctor, that nurse, if it's somebody that we can build a collaboration and a connection and a trust with to support as well as save a life. Because now we have to look at the fact that maternal mental health is also the leading cause to people unaliving themselves. When you feel you don't have anything to lose, and when you have a life of trauma, that starts real young like mine did, I'm grateful for my community, which was my church, and, those around me who saw something in me. And I just feel as though we need to have more conversations to know what to expect. This is not pretty work. And family regulation is one of the most degrading, dehumanizing, destructive, traumatizing experiences that a Black family will ever have to deal with, because it's a continuation of chattel slavery, and it's rooted in the same system, and it's built on the same premise that we are not worthy and that we deserve mistreatment, maltreatment because of our deficiencies that are often caused by the system.
Mm, mm. That is, listen, we got to consider our ways. Um, like we really have to consider our ways and why we're in this work. And that's something as a birth worker, trainer, and coach that I really challenge people with. You want to get rich and, act like you helping somebody with a baby, find another way, boo, because this will pull on your heartstrings. And it's not a problem if you're deficient in an area. We all have room and ways to grow. You might need to get up under a mentor or a coach. You might need to go to an implicit bias training yourself. You might have to get your life if you have had, a very clean family and a very, beautiful kind of a neighborhood and didn't see these things. And all of this is shocking to the system. And you're like, how could they be so selfish to their baby? If that's how you respond, you have to do some work before you can do a hip squeeze. Don't do nobody no hip squeeze, and you can't handle that first. Right. And so that's real. There is training, there is resources, there are spaces, there are therapists where you can process and strengthen yourself so that you can very much so with clear eyes and gaze be able to help people. So it looks like birth workers, champions, childbirth educators, perinatal folks, it looks like really doing some hard work ourselves, building relationships with our families without judgment, and then being able to phone a friend for help too. We need some resources. And Malcolm, I saw your question there as well. Because doulas tend to be some of the frontline people, we tend to see all the details of the relationship, what's going on, because we all up in their world. We tend to know what bill wasn't paid or whatever. We're just in the house, in the community. And in community birth work, you tend to literally be a neighbor. Like I live down the street or around the corner, or I knew your great uncle. And so we're sharing in this experience together. And so, with that, in order to lessen some of the load and burden to feel like you have to be an expert in all things, know who to call for help, know where folks should go, know the hotlines, have the resources, the
Absolutely.
magnets we can put on the fridge, the chip clips, because we're going to eat chips and we're going to go to the fridge. So, get your magnet and get your chip clip with the hotline, the crisis line for everything you can imagine.
That's great
And
swag.
it is. It's really good because I'm looking at, I got breastfeeding stuff on my fridge, the warning signs for preeclampsia. Like it's just as serious as these medical things, these physical things that we might 911 over, right? So that we can ensure folks have the resources, even if it's an area that you haven't particularly mastered yourself. Community birth workers should be the resource space, right? And so that may look like hitting up other birth workers and folks in your community to find out what's being done around perinatal supports so that you can be in the know. And so I really love what, like, just where this conversation is kind of going. And again, it's not, I want to encourage birth workers and folks in the space to just take a deep breath. Sometimes we feel like we have to be masters of all things, not necessarily, but do you know where to go get the help or a training or a workshop to help you refine some things? That is the biggest thing. As we impose and encourage our clients to have community, you also need community. And so I'd love to hear before we transition into bringing Catherine up, if there are any other thoughts or final things that kind of bubble up for you right now in terms of other practical ways that birth workers, perinatal professionals, and support folks can really be a support in the process, and even specifically when it comes to separation.
Well, I think it's important that we don't fall into the bureaucratic and the political side of this Black birth justice and Black birth workspace becoming sideswiped by a separate agenda. And I'm going to say that in plain English. We know that whenever there is funding and policy tied to Black bodies, there's always going to be a method where we're going to be surveilled and looked at. This is just has been the story of our lives for the 14% of time we've been free in this country. And in breaking that down from our first Juneteenth, or when we were free-ish now, we have to look at we are the experts. And I feel that there's a lot of policy regulating and dictating the Black birth space. Number one, community doulas are just that. I heard you mention, I live like down the street. Community doulas need to be stationed and situated and working and operating in that community, just like our grand midwives. The grand midwives of Southampton County in the Low Country, where my great-great-great-grandmother and great-great-great-grandmother served, they were in that community. They weren't in Beaufort. Beaufort had their own grand midwives. And so what I see is in this space, we have a lot of birth workers that are moving and shaking and we're all about, but you don't know that community. So it's important that we don't get caught up in the policy and the regulations of things, that we forget to fight for our own community and be willing to serve in your own community. And then the second thing, it's not a good idea for Black birth workers to be out here doulaing alone. We need collectives. We are already an unregulated field. And it's almost like if we're not careful, we're going to see a repeat of the Shepard-Towner Act. And we're going to become regulated. And then we're not going to have this resource at all. And then we're going to have to go through similar trainings like CNAs and home health aides. We're going to need to be licensed. So we have to kind of balance what we do and what we want and what we ask for and make this sustainable and sufficient. Turn this over into building wellness collectives. If Black birth collectives really came together and went after funding independent of the government systems, because again, if they feed you, they control you. But if we are building up our communities, and if we are setting the record straight on what really goes on and how this can really play out, I think it's important that we focus on building resources within the resource. I feel that it's important that we build collectives within the collectives. I don't want to be in these streets alone. In my community, I was fortunate enough to train a few doulas, and I know right now, right in my community, there's one I can call. Hey, I need you to get to the hospital because I can't get there. They're not worried about money. They're not worried about how much they're getting paid, because it's hard work. And so I feel like that comes from building. I feel that comes from utilizing our gift and our ability to be communal and really do what's best for our family and for our children, because we're already on the verge of raising a motherless generation. It's estimated 7,000 Black mamas have lost their lives between 2018 and today. Just 2 years ago, 2019, 491 Black babies did not see their first birthday in New Jersey, and we could go down the stats. We can go down the state stats. New Jersey went from 47th in maternal outcomes to 29th, not because we did better, but because other states did worse. So this is a systemic, and it's also a nationwide issue. And I feel that, we do have the BMMA. We have, birth justice collectives like Ancient Songs, program with the Birth Justice Institute. We are emerging, but I feel like we just need to move a little bit faster with a little more urgency, because Black lives, Black babies, Black mamas, Black daddies, everybody Black, our lives really depend on this. And it's important that we lean into that and we realize that we are not competition, that collaborations work, and that our families and the strength of our families and our future generations depend on what we can do today in ending family regulation and family policing.
That's a word. It's enough for everybody to eat. We ain't fighting, not up in here, not on my watch. And we need to move with urgency. I love it. Thank you so much for that. You all continue to keep the comments and the questions flowing in the chat. Catherine, I'd love to invite you to the mic. Please feel free to share some context for the work that you do and dive into the things you want to share with the good people this evening.
Yeah, so I actually want to start by thanking all of you for the work that you're doing, because the support that you offer, being on the front lines, like you said, it's invaluable and it's necessary to help, interrupt or reduce the harm that is occurring nationwide. So thank you to all of you. Just want to make sure that I give you your flowers. I will be sharing what lawyers can do to help, but I also think it's important to know, to talk about what advocates can do as well, that we have found has been helpful. So prior to starting with If When How, I was at Brooklyn Defender Services, where I defended parents who had allegations of abuse or neglect, and we're dealing with the family regulation system. So at that point, when I interacted with them, they were already dealing with, a caseworker, and were in court, unfortunately, and some of them had their children removed. So unfortunately, as attorneys, we typically don't get involved until much later after a case has begun and a caseworker has been involved. So I think that advocates are in a very special and unique position because you have some perspective about, what a report entails, how it begins, what follows. And so you're in a better position to guide your clients and set their expectations. So I'll start with what happens once a report is made. And I will say that this is general, right? Because in many different states, the process is different. I know that a lot of you are from, I think you mentioned Jersey, Toshira. So, all different states, but generally when a report is made, someone calls the state central registry. And there are a number of ways that, the family regulation system can become involved, but let's assume a medical provider makes a child abuse or neglect report. The report is either unfounded or indicated. If it's unfounded, then that means that they determined that the report was false, or, there wasn't any abuse. If it's indicated, it's referred for an initial screening to the local child protective agency for further investigation. And when a report is indicated, it can either be indicated with court involvement or without. Both of those would still include preventative services and surveillance, as all of you can imagine. From here, the family will have to deal with various court dates, surveillance services, drug tests, mental health evaluations, you name it. And so again, laws and processes may vary in different states, but that's generally what the process looks like, as specifically in New York too. So now that we have a general understanding of what that process is like, I want to transition to what lawyers can do. So many attorneys and legal organizations offer Know Your Rights trainings, where parents and advocates can learn about their rights as it comes to dealing with the family regulation system. So I will share that it is incredibly important to know your rights, but to also know and be prepared for what happens when you do assert your rights. Oftentimes, we hear, oh, you have the right for this and you have the right to do that. But I think we are responsible for also telling people this is what happens when you assert those rights, not to deter them, right? I would never want to deter somebody from asserting their rights, but to prepare them and to give them the information that they need to weigh their options and make the best choices for themselves. So for example, right, you have the right to refuse to speak to ACS or to let them into your home without a court order, or to refuse to do services. But they should know that they'll continue to seek information. They'll go to the children's schools, your neighbors, a spouse, ex-partner, and ask information and try to then bring a case in court and say, this person was not complying and this is what the allegations are. So it's important to just be really mindful of that and to share that with your clients. During those trainings, you can also learn more specifically about rights in your state. So for example, in New York City, that's where I practice. And so a lot of my information comes from there. But in New York City public hospitals, they're required to get written consent from a pregnant person or a birthing person before administering a drug test. And they can certainly refuse to be drug tested, but consent is not required to test the newborn. This is just something that's specific to New York and something that oftentimes you'll hear in a Know Your Rights training. Another example is in Missouri. They can place a child with a family member for up to 90 days without having to get any court intervention or a court order, which is very different from how it usually occurs in many states. So that's also just something to know and to emphasize. It's different in every state, and there is a lot that you can learn at Know Your Rights trainings. There are also early defense programs. So some states like Baltimore, for example, have pre-petition or early defense programs where attorneys, social workers, and advocates can work with parents before a petition is filed in court. to try to reduce any court involvement, which just will prolong surveillance and to avoid family separation. And these can be really helpful. A lot of states are now trying to, implement this and start these programs. And then there is our helpline. So if you suspect that CPS is going to be called in New York City, it's CPS, Child Protective Services. You should contact an attorney as soon as possible. You can contact our helpline, and we have a network and are continuing to build that network throughout the country to provide state-specific support. But on the helpline, we can offer an initial assessment. So unfortunately, when you contact us, right, or when you speak to an attorney, oftentimes you hear, it depends, it depends, it depends. And I used to hate hearing that before I went to law school, but then I went and I realized it's true. When I was at Brooklyn Defender Services, I'd have at any time 40 to 50 cases. And many of those cases could have been similar allegations about, this person tested positive and their child tested positive. But then, the actual circumstances for each of those cases were different. The facts were different. And so the strategy would be based on that person's goals and the facts in that case. So it's important to consult with an attorney at least in the beginning to just try and see what approach you want to take and how you want to address the situation. Another thing, just to give you all an example, if, I would have, like I said, cases where the allegation was substance abuse. One parent may know that they need to get treatment, they want the help, but they're okay with the removal of the child for the time being, but do want their child placed with a family member, right? That's not for us to decide, to judge, to determine, no, let's push for the child to stay with you. They know what they need for themselves and what's best for them in that moment. And I could also have a parent who, same allegations, but they were anticipating that they were going to test positive during their pregnancy, didn't want to have the child removed. And so you work with them, and maybe there's a mother-child treatment program that they can enroll in, right? Maybe there's services that they can do throughout, programs that they can attend throughout their pregnancy, so that when it does come to giving birth, there are ways for them to advocate for themselves and to show, like, I am battling this, but I've been working towards, addressing the situation. So I think working with lawyers is pretty important, because especially if it's before court, because there are many different ways in which I've seen so many lawyers be creative to craft a solution that works for that specific family and what they're experiencing. And now I would like to, I know we're coming up on time, so I'm sorry if I'm rushing, but I want to make sure that I give you guys all this information. As far as advocates, what we've seen that has been very helpful is setting expectations for your clients. So letting them know what can happen if CPS is called, right? Remind them to answer what the caseworker asks and not to overshare. Oftentimes when a caseworker, becomes involved, they're going to come and ask them a lot of questions. In those moments, they're nervous, they're scared, they have no idea how this is going to go, right? And these caseworkers come with the approach of, oh, the more you tell me, the better I can help you. I'm here to offer you services, which we know is not the case. But in that situation, you can expect and understand why they'd overshare, right? So if a provider makes a report and says, this newborn tested positive for marijuana, the mother tested positive for marijuana, the caseworker can say, what happened? And now this goes from, they'll respond and say, well, I did, smoke marijuana, but it was only once, and it was because I was just anxious. I had a fight with my partner, right? And now this went from just a petition with allegations about substance use to a petition with allegations about substance use, mental health, and also domestic violence, right? So now we have multiple issues and allegations in a petition for court. So it's hard for people not to overshare, and I get why, but if you can walk your clients through what those conversations can look like, what kind of questions they may ask them, and try to help them be mindful about their responses, I think that's extremely helpful. Because there are ways to answer questions where you're complying, but only as much as you need to. If they ask, do you know why we're here today? they can ask them, well, if ACS has concerns about my child's safety, I'd really appreciate you sharing those with me so that we can work towards, a resolution, as opposed to, well, I heard, the doctor say X, Y, and Z, but that's not true. And getting into a whole story about that and creating a story for that caseworker to run with and to make into something bigger. Or, tell me about your past. Have you ever I see that you were in the foster care system, or, have you ever dealt with X, Y, and Z? They can say, I would
Oh,
really,
yeah, I think it's not a twist off. Why wouldn't he open it?
they can respond and say, I would really prefer to focus on the things that are happening in the present and what I can do now to ensure that my baby remains in my care. Instead of, well, I was in the foster care system and I did have these issues, but I'm not dealing with that anymore, right? Because again, we're giving the caseworker a story. So just having a conversation with your client about, hey, if CPS is going to be called, this is something that can happen. And these are the questions that they may ask you. These are ways that you can possibly respond, trying to remind them to be mindful, and to try to keep them grounded. I saw, Portia, a few times you said, take a deep breath, and that's so important. People really don't understand how far that goes, but taking those deep breaths throughout those really chaotic moments, makes a world of a difference for people. And then also as advocates to take incredibly detailed notes. So notes about the tests that are being done, names of everybody involved, from the doctors to the caseworkers. There are so many people that become involved. And when you're in that space where it's chaotic, where you're scared, where you're afraid, you're not sure what's going to happen, being able to have someone there who's taking notes and who's writing things down so that you can refer back to, and so that, if you are either going to sue or just want to hold people accountable, you have that to refer back to. And those are accurate notes that were taken by somebody there, someone else who wasn't in such a distressed state. And then the other thing is also letting the client know there are people that can help. There are legal organizations available. I think that in almost every state, if not every state, there is an attorney that you can be connected to either provide an assessment, or to provide some advice on how to navigate a certain situation. And you can also join our network. Like I said, we accept calls from people all throughout the country. And so we're actively building a network. We have a network and continuing to build that network, so that, because you are on the front lines and you know what's best and what resources to provide people to as well. So we offer trainings and we have a learning system where people can utilize the resources that we have as well. And then I did see that there was a question about, I don't want to misquote anyone, but essentially how to stop, as an OBGYN, I'm interested in how we can stop contributing to the separation of families with our mandatory reporting in clinical settings. We do have a video course. It's called Doing Right by Birth. And it includes brief modules that cover mandatory reporting laws and how to interrupt the test and report chain. What we have found is that providers specifically, are actually very misinformed about when they do have to report. And that's something that I'll share that resource with Leslie so that she can send it out to participants. But I wanted to mention, a lot of times, providers think that they have to report something, and that's actually not the case. The other thing is, there's also a prenatal drug exposure reporting requirement resource. It's a summary of legal requirements regarding testing and reporting. And then I'll also send that out to Leslie so she can send it out to everyone. And the final thing that I'll mention is that there are only 2 states that require drug testing of pregnant and birthing parents in some circumstances. And only 4 states require drug testing of newborns in some circumstances. So that's just goes to show you, a lot of times these providers are making these calls on their own account, for very obvious reasons, right? Because if it's a white pregnant person, it's likely that they won't make the call. If it's a Black pregnant person, they will. And a lot of providers are misinformed about the laws in their states. So I strongly recommend, when Leslie sends those documents out, that you all review them and just send them out to your networks too, so that they can spread that as well. But that's it.
There was one more question, And this could be for you or Porsche, Toshira, from Malcolm. He asked in the beginning, how can we help destigmatize this work in both training and policy, especially in entry-level workforce?
Portia, you want to go at it?
I'm gonna let you go with it.
Okay, well, I'll compartmentalize it. So um, on the policy front, I think it's important that we understand that as we aggressively push for Medicaid reimbursement, we are also inviting a lot of surveillance into the work, and it may limit our ability to be able to engage with our community. All money isn't good money. There are other ways to make this work sustainable. And I think another area that we need to touch on and be very honest about is there is no money in being a Black doula. I don't care what anyone says, unless you are an MD, a midwife, a IBCLC, a therapist. If you do not have a licensure or credentialing, with years of education backing it, this is soul work and it's community based. So I think we need to first kill the narrative that we're in this for money and then go after making money, because it's going to be years before we get that $3,000 standard reimbursement that California was aggressive and pushed for. Big ups to Cali, but let's just be honest, these are not achievable battles that we're going to be able to win. And so I think it's important that we are very pragmatic and that we are very much grassroots. Our ear and our hands and our feet and our passions are closest to the people. And I think as long as we begin to build that tapestry of support, churches and houses of worship, you go in a Black community, they're either going to be one or two faiths, either Christian or Muslim. And so reach into these networks. And then what we do is we're training and we're supporting so that it doesn't fall on just the doula. Now you have reached, okay, into the religious community. Okay, well, the church has a pantry. The church has a soup kitchen. The church got a few sisters that's willing to, come and sit with you. It's just building those networks. And then I feel from a community approach, it's important that we build coalition. I feel that the voices of the community needs to speak, and there are not enough of us at the table to be able to say what it is they need. I think it's a lot of generalizations, and I think that it's a lot of push for things just to be performative. Meanwhile, with all of these, wait, the momnibus still hasn't passed yet. Okay, so I think at a policy level, let's start with the achievable fight, the battles that are achievable. And I think it's important that we work on a macro and a micro level so that it's being hit at all points. I'm not in Washington, D.C., but I'm connected to the face of the movement that is. I'm not as aggressive in my push, with attacking the disenfranchisement as Mama Joyce McMillan is. But we are connected. Portia, she's one about reclaiming Black motherhood. I find my resources in my family and my tribe, and we figure out how we can connect and how we can intersect. And then we move forward with making this sustainable so no one can tell us what to do. No one can tell us what works in our community. And we've been a subject of that for far too long, and it's continuing. And we do have Black doctors that want to support their communities. We do have Black doctors that want to dismantle this system. Dr. Henderson is on the phone. Dr. Farrington is here. We do have our own resources and networks, but if we are separated and if we don't know the resourcing and the support within our community, we're going to always look outside of it. So I feel that it's important that we build network, coalition, and then that we are aggressive in being trauma focused, but also vitality focused, recovery focused, and breaking down these generational cycles so that although I was a 17-year-old mom on welfare, living in the projects, Afro-Latino, I know what it's like to be judged. My daughters weren't going to be 17-year-olds. Moms, they were going to bring home degrees and not birth certificates. And I think that's a great part of doula work. It's now empowering in that first 42 days when mortality and morbidity is highest. What are you doing? In that first 1,000 days, doulas are lifelong. So I feel like that if we put all those pieces together and we become more encompassing and we become more familial, I feel that we will tear down and disrupt and agitate these systems that are capitalist in this approach. And I also feel that we can be more humane, building vitality, encouraging and supportive of the systems that we know that work, and that's community.
That's good. That's good. That's good. That's good. The only thing I'll add is that on the birth worker perinatal front, um, these typical weekend trainings, they just ain't enough. It ain't cutting it. And not to say that you have to, and I'm one that's degreed up and multiple certifications, and I also could see that education is also some foolishness. Like that's why I err on the side of homeschool, but or world school, life school, whatever. But not to say that we need to be at some particular standard because we don't have this uniform birth worker credentialing, right? But knowing that just saying you could do a hip squeeze, good luck, and go do this work is not enough. We need to surround our people. We need to introduce resources to them. We need to not let people launch out and be by themselves and then they burn out, quit, and they're out because they can't pay their bills. This is what I deal with on the regular as a coach. And it's just like that's not good enough. So as we see people being excited to jump into this work, grab hands, make recommendations, hold people so that we can make sure that they have what they need. Um, so that's definitely one thing that I would say. And we have another two questions coming up. Which states are best practices? So if there's any particular states that we can highlight to help in this battle. Um, and I'm not sure if anyone has a thought on that. And I don't know if you mean particularly on the policy side or how supports are being offered. I know Catherine mentioned New York.
There are
Where they
many.
are. Yeah.
There are many in the links. The slides have posted, I believe, 20 different resources, different places to get involved. JMAC, Joyce McMillan's work in New York is a great example of how community can be advocating for legal change, legislative changes, pushing for the Miranda Act for families. I mean, there's many things to get involved with, and many of them are in the link, in the resource slides. And of course, supporting your local community community doula services and collectives. They are bringing families to the resources that they need. If they don't offer them, then they know what's available in the community. So you want to support that holistic support in your community too.
Absolutely.
Toshira, you're on mute.
You're muted now.
Dr. Henderson put a question in the chat, and I'm going to just summarize it. It's basically, how can the doctors or the medical community be a part of dismantling this system? Am I paraphrasing that right? I think, Portia, if you could read that out.
Yeah.
Okay. I think it's important that doctors see the resourcing as well as the beautiful relationship that can be between doulas and doctors. A lot of times we get a lot of flack and a lot of pushback from doctors. And I feel that, we already deal with enough in the community and in the hospitals, but I feel like doctors, if they could just see the beauty that can evolve from the relationship, you will have happier clients. Because while you may only be able to spend a limited amount of time and you may see them, maybe 2 or 3 times throughout their whole pregnancy, because especially understanding how Medicaid works, you're not going to always see the same doctor. You might see a midwife, you might see the doctor, and the doctor or the midwife that you built a relationship with may not even be there to deliver your baby. And that's how it works when you're dealing with certain populations where it's not tiered insurance. And I feel like doctors could work along with doulas to help us to be able to carry the message that you may need to be reiterated with, if that patient or That consumer, that patient, that parent is all one person. That parent is not my patient, that's your patient, but she's the consumer of all of it. And I feel like it's important that doctors utilize us to their benefit and to their advantage. And I feel that Black doulas and yeah, Afro Latino, Black, I'm gonna say it all, BIPOC, we are underutilized in the healthcare space. It's almost, and I do sit on a major board with Burke Foundation, and, just kind of like hearing what doctors think about doulas and midwives. It's hurtful to know that we're often looked at as more for you means less for me. So I feel like that's one area we need to dismantle that. Realize that we are here for the same reason, for the same purpose, overall good maternal outcome for that parent, that consumer, and that patient. And if we're working collaboratively and collectively, and if that patient feels centered in the experience and they know that everybody is on their side, because everybody is on the same page, and if in fact family regulation is an issue or the family policing system, becomes an issue in that family. And it doesn't necessarily have to be because of drug abuse. It could be because the family had a fire and now the family is unhoused and they can't let this family leave with nowhere to go. These are systemic issues, they're poverty issues. It's important that doctors utilize us as their hands and their feet and their arms and their eyes and ears in a way that's holistic, in a way that's trust building, in a way that realizes that we're here for each other for the same reason. And I oftentimes don't think doctors see it that way. And I think that if you, Dr. Henderson, being a Black OBGYN, realize that, we are really all in this together, and we're all in it for the common goal. When we put that across in our community, I feel like it just changes the landscape when there's unity in the work that we're doing.
That's good. That's good. That's good. I'm just checking to see if there were any other final questions just before we share a call to action. And thank you, Brianna, for constantly putting the resources in the chat so you all can have a chance to dive through that. I don't think we skipped anybody. Okay, just two call to actions that come to mind. One, take a moment to go through those slides, to go through those resources, see what's applicable to your state, and then hit the block with it, for lack of better terms. I'm from Philly, so we hitting the block. Okay, so that may be LinkedIn, if that's your lane. That may be IG, you screenshotting and tagging all the birth workers. That might be a Facebook group that you're particularly a part of that's local to your area. Something has been illuminated for you, something has been shared with you. It's time to now hit the block and tell everybody else that's doing this work that they need to be aware. My second call to action would be to connect with the Black Coalition for Safe Motherhood, for ACT, right? Get in on an ACT workshop. They are free, they're virtual once a month, so that you can get these tactics, in your system and be able to see how you can play a role in spreading the word even further around some simple tactics around advocacy, and also pairing it, as Catherine mentioned, pairing it with the caveat of, yeah, go ahead and get buck, go ahead and let them know that you're not playing, but be ready for some pushback. So I'm not going to just equip you with how to say no or demanding consent or piecing out after you to sign some papers and saying I don't want services here anymore, but be prepared for the foolishness that could possibly come as a result of that. And so how can you better equip yourself for that and the people that you serve? So that would be my encouragement. You have a wealth of resources here and folks that are willing to share with you. And we will absolutely be following up with the resources once again, and ways to stay in touch if there are continued questions regarding this topic, and ways that we can be a benefit to you wherever you are serving pregnant and birthing folks.
Could you guys drop your contact information in the chat as well, just in case anyone wants to reach out to you? But this was an amazing knowledge share call. I felt like I was at church. I was listening to a sermon. You guys were just preaching so much knowledge. It was beautiful. And I just consumed so much. And I'm sure everybody else feels the same. So many great resources. Thank you guys so much for taking your time out to share all this beautiful knowledge with us. Very grateful.
Thank you, Brianna, for the opportunity and for allowing this space. Thank you again, Catherine and Toshira, for the amazing work that you're doing, how you're showing up in these streets. Leslie, Dr. Farrington, we thank you and salute you for your passion and concern for birthing folks and why we needed to even have this conversation in the first place. And I will continue to encourage deep breaths, hydration, as we continue to fight the powers that be. Period. Hydration and deep breaths.